Dámy a pánové, ladies and gentlemen, as this is being conducted in English, I will also speak in English. I welcome you here for this special event, which not only symbolizes the cooperation of the CEVRO Institute together with the Institute for Counter-Terrorism of the IDC Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, Israel, but I hope it's going to be also very interesting and refreshing set of presentations and then follow-up debate, questions, answers. We will try to make sure that there is some time gap for the questions and answers. I welcome here all three former teachers of mine in ICT, because I did study the counterterrorism at the institute or at Herzliya University. And of course I welcome Ivo Schwarz, the head of the civilian intelligence, who has accepted our offer and is going to say a few words here from the Czech perspective on the topic of terrorism in the present world, and various different and new aspects which maybe we are not looking at directly, or we sometimes do not see from reading our newspapers or looking at our experience here from Prague, from Central Europe, into the topic of terrorism. First of all, I would like to mention two people who made this possible with their donations to support this program. One is Petr Motel, who is sitting here, so we thank Petr for his contribution, without which it would not be possible to have here foreign guests and to have them in the Czech Republic. The other one who is not here is David Herzky, who has contributed from Israel. So the thanks go to them. We have not spent all of their money, so we will continue with those sessions and with that kind of cooperation together with ICT and broadening it to some other countries and experts from some other countries. Then I would like to invite Ivan Langer, the chairman of board of the CEVRO Institute, to formally launch this event and to say a few words for the beginning. Ivan, please.
Thank you, Tomas. Dear guests, friends and colleagues, welcome on board. Welcome here in our college, CEVRO Institute. I used such a friendly welcome because our school is not only an academic ship proposing an education on several branches and on several levels, like a bachelor and a master's degree in politology and international relations, public administration, private and business law, economy, but also a master degree in security studies. I used this friendly welcome on board because our school is also a place, space or family which consists of people with common or very common or even the similar values and views, and people who believe that what they do for themselves is not only for themselves but also is useful for the rest of the society. And that's why I'm really glad to have you here, because I do believe that you're such persons who will share with us our views, who will work on yourselves to be better, to be well educated, to be some kind of engine of our society. Once upon a time, I was asked my friend, "You speak about the ship, aren't you a battleship?" And my answer was, well, it depends how you see it. Maybe we are here in this private college battleship, but here you won't find any guns, any missiles, because this and this are our weapons. And to be better prepared, to be better than the others, it means that you have to not only be good in what you are proposing, what you know, but you have to share your experience, your knowledges with the others. And that's why we are here. Tomas mentioned where our friends are coming from. This seminar, this conference is a practical start or practical beginning of the cooperation of CEVRO Institute with Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya and its International Institute of Counter-Terrorism. I do believe that you will enjoy this program. I do believe that you will attend our activities, and I do believe that you will become a real part of CEVRO Institute family. Enjoy this afternoon, dear colleagues, dear friends. The floor is yours, and I'm sure that we won't sleep long time today because we will be thinking about everything what will be mentioned today here. Please enjoy the afternoon and welcome.
Thank you very much. And since Ivo Schwarz has asked to speak from the table, not from the podium, so I will now also be sitting and introducing him without any long introduction, but Ivo has got experience with international affairs. He's got experience with the intelligence, from the intelligence world, from the security world. He has in the past attended some of the sessions and seminars done by the institute, by the Counter-Terrorism Institute in Israel, and I'm glad that he's familiar with the gentlemen sitting here around the table, and he's definitely not a newcomer. So without further ado, Ivo, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Tomáš. Ladies and gentlemen, I am really honored to be the opener speaker of such kind of meeting or discussion, even if the topic is not very positive. But firstly, I would like to ask you for accepting one of my apology. I am not authorized to speak about classified information, so my presentation probably won't be so interesting as some of you might expect. And now to the topic. Czech Republic international cooperation and threats of terrorism. Terrorism is an international phenomenon which affects each and every country, and Czech Republic is no exception. The fact that there has not been any major terrorist attack against the Czech Republic may change in the short future. Attacks in other parts of Europe may serve as a warning. The internet, social networks, and modern communication technology erase distance and connect terrorism supporters and potential recruits across the world. They provide these people with a means of addressing masses without having to leave their home and running the risk of being exposed. It provides them with tools to plan and stimulate the whole terrorist attack from the comfort of their home. Lone wolf terrorists pose a great threat at present as they self-radicalize and decide to attack often merely on the basis of jihadist propaganda on internet. It is extremely difficult for security forces to detect such individuals. There are the deterring examples from Germany, the case of Arit Uka, Frankfurt 2011, France, Mohamed Merah, Toulouse and Montabouan, 2012, and probably also last weekend attack in Brussels was such kind of case. Today, European terrorists are a highly decentralized group of like-minded individuals without a single command and solid structure. The only clue are ideological leaders who operate most often via internet. The only possible solutions are effective and intensive international cooperation and a joint effort across the whole international community. The Czech Republic's active approach is how we express solidarity with other terrorism-afflicted countries and our principal contribution to the fight against terrorism. The Czech Republic's counter-terrorist activities are in line with those within NATO and the European Union. The Czech Republic has been long actively engaged in the fight against terrorism, basically in these two organizations. The most visible of these activities are international operations against terrorism, where the Czech Republic sent its units, Afghanistan and Mali, and engaged in development programs aiding the locals. This clearly demonstrates the Czech Republic's stance or position, which makes it legitimate terrorist target, as we spoke before. The Czech Republic mostly focuses on the protecting critical infrastructure and preventing terrorists from using CBRN, it means chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear materials. Nevertheless, soft targets primarily targeted by terrorists are also worthy of special attention. They include shopping malls, stations, and other places with high concentration of people, where it is relatively easy to inflict damages and casualties. Terrorist attacks in Mumbai in 2008 and Nairobi in 2013 may serve as examples of such attacks. This is of crucial importance for the Czech Republic. There are precious UNESCO historic sites, including Jewish one, in the Czech Republic. Every year, millions of tourists flock to the Czech Republic to see these monuments, and they become a potential ideal terrorist target. As a warning, we can see the terrorist attack in Burgas, Bulgaria, 2012. There is also a non-lethal phase to terrorism, such as money laundering, forging of IDS, illegal migration, logistic support, and basis for terrorists. Terrorists use organized crime for their own logistic operations. The Czech Republic has experienced this. We have to bear in mind that there is more than just Islamic terrorism or radicalism. Various right-wing and left-wing groups are gaining popularity under the current complicated economic situation. Anti-immigration, anti-minority, and nationalist sentiment is on the rise, as we could see also in the Czech Republic during the recent pre-election campaign. As a result, there is a threat of a terrorist attack led by a non-Islamic radical, such as Anders Breivik in Norway 2011. And of course, the Czech Republic has its own right, as well as a left-wing extremist. Now I would like to speak about two international cases which can have an influence on security situation not only in the Czech Republic, but in Europe as such. First is the situation in Syria. From the perspective of the fight against terrorism, the conflict in Syria poses the greatest risk to all European countries at present. In particular, there is the issue of European fighters who threaten European internal security by traveling to Syria in large numbers in order to take part in jihad. For European countries' security forces, they represent a problem of an as yet unrecognized scale. Also, Europe has had to address its citizens' travels to dangerous regions for a long time. Individuals who were not of interest to security forces at all, often radicalized in a very short period. In certain cases, only several weeks pass between the first contact with hazardous content, personally or on internet, and their departure to Syria, which makes their activities harder to detect. The internet almost always plays an important role in the radicalization. There exists an infinite number of websites and social network profiles. Some of these activities are carried out directly in Syria, and examples of calls from direct participants in the conflict are the most effective. These activities can be monitored to a certain extent. However, it can't be prevented. Facilitation networks are small and based on personal context. They have been gradually professionalized and have better conspiracy. It is therefore more and more difficult to penetrate such kind of networks. For most European volunteers, Turkey is an arch gateway to Syria. However, they often use the complicated ways. For instance, instead of flying from their homeland, they fly from abroad. This is another factor which complicates their identification. In Syria, volunteers primarily join radical jihadist organizations. Some of them are promoted to leading positions in their units, and some may be trained in Syria for special tasks they carry out after they return to Europe, especially in organizations connected with Al-Qaeda, as Jabal al-Nusra, the Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, and Ahrar al-Sham. radicalization in connection with contacts with terrorist organizations in Syria is the main security threat to European countries. Considering the number of repatriates, especially to larger countries, but generally to the Schengen area as such, and the fact that these individuals often have a citizenship of the particular country, they can hardly be prevented from returning. There is usually not sufficient evidence of their activity in Syria that would enable their imprisonment for a concrete crime, although a good criminal definition of a membership in a terrorist organization and or criminalization of involvement in armed combat abroad can help. Probably also the case of Brussels, or this person which made a case in Brussels was such kind of example. Possible solutions and challenges running from these activities. When monitoring who leaves for Syria, international cooperation is crucial, and so is information sharing to the maximum extent possible under individual countries' legislation. And this is also one of the priorities of my service. The main task of intelligence service in the given situation is to obtain and evaluate local information with the aim of identify the individuals. It is the duty of external intelligence service, monitor their activities, duty of internal security and intelligence service, after their return, and enable police units to detect possible criminal activities in their homeland in time. Cooperation between foreign and domestic intelligence service or intelligence and security service and police in their homeland and also within the international community is therefore crucial. Only the improvement of existing and introduction of new pan-European, let's say European Union databases of passenger name records and entry-exit system for the Schengen area can systematically solve the problem of monitoring the departures of volunteers in general to all jihadist regions. Both the proposals have been long discussed by European Union authorities, but no decision yet. And second external phenomena, which I would like to mention in this content, is the Czech experience with terrorists from Caucasus Emirate and their infiltration into organized crime. At present, there is a small North Caucasian diaspora consisting mainly of Chechen and Dagestani citizens on the Czech territory. As for the Chechen citizens, most of them are refugees from the First and Second Chechen Wars period. Some of them actively participated in the fights against Russian armed forces in this conflict. However, most of these refugees try to live a normal life. The long-term unstable situation in the whole North Caucasus, together with Russian security forces' unscrupulous anti-terrorist campaign, largely contributes to the radicalization of the Caucasian Muslim population and their inclination to the terrorist group Caucasus Emirate. There was a massive wave of departures of North Caucasians, especially Chechens, Dagestani and Ingushetians, for the European Union countries. They are looking for a base and help from their compatriots in the large North Caucasian diasporas. These are mostly refugees looking for better living conditions and future in Europe. Another group consists of injured fighters cured in European healthcare facilities and also of their families hiding from members of the Russian security structures and using European countries as a logistic base for their relaxation and regeneration. Particular risk individuals are then active, especially in organized crime, and are involved in the large-scale networks of Russian criminal groups operating across Europe. Their main activities are falsification of documents, trade in stolen cars, drugs, and human trafficking. Funds obtained from the above-mentioned activities are used to support the Caucasian Emirates fighters in Europe, as well in the Caucasus in Syria. So, ladies and gentlemen, Czech Republic is no exception in being terrorist attack target, and only complex of legal organization, intelligence, security, but also financial and logistic measures, both on national and also international level, can minimize the potential risk. Thank you for attention.
Well, thank you very much for this overview and for the perspective from Prague, from Czech Republic, which is definitely, well, not very nice, but everything is relative. Being from Israel, which has now celebrated 66 years of its existence, and coping with terrorism on the forefront, on the frontier, all over its existence, then the perspective from Prague looks definitely nice. And what we try to do once putting together this seminar is to use and to try to get from our expert guests their perspective on the current status of terrorism seen from Israel, but linking it to Czech Republic and to Europe, and to try to show how and much it is relevant to our experience, what we can be expecting in the future, and how much we are really a target, potential target, hot target, and whatever can be expected, and what we should be prepared for, looking at the trends, once we are not out of those trends ourselves. I'm very glad that they have come, as I already said, and I would like to ask Boaz to put it more on the broader frame of the current situation, so looking into the current terrorist threats, and then going into the specifics with Amichai regarding the foreign fighters already mentioned on the example of Syria, or the cyber terrorism, which is basically the new phenomenon, or new to be phenomenon, maybe, which will be elaborated by Eitan. So I had the real privilege and pleasure to study with Boaz, who has founded the Institute long before the 9/11 and long before other institutes of such kind were founded and started in other parts of the world, or if in other parts of the Western world. So Boaz and his people and the Institute really accumulates the vast experience, the first-hand experience from inside Israel, but also the vast experience of collaboration with other institutes and think tanks and institutions around the world, which is, at the end, very unique, and we are glad to have you here. Boaz, please, floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Thomas is the kind of student that, on one hand, you like to have, on the other hand, you should be very afraid of, because he's so knowledgeable that you need to not to make any mistakes when you are teaching him. So it's a privilege to be here, Thomas. Thank you for having us here. Ivan, thank you for having us here. It's a privilege to be next to Mr. Schwarz. And we'll also have the honor to have here the Deputy Ambassador of Israel, Shachar. Thank you for coming. We see this gathering today as, I would say, as an opening for a much more in-depth relationship between CEVRO and the Institute for Counter-Terrorism, ICT, in Israel, which is the main think tank in counterterrorism in the Israeli academia. And we are eager to explore this knowledge and experience of ours and to give it to you and to get your perspectives as we do in this specific gathering. What I intend to do in the coming 20 minutes that I have is to share with you some of my thoughts on some generic issues that has to do with terrorism, and then to translate it and to focus on concrete threats that we are facing in the region and you are facing here, the global arena, in reference to the implications of the Arab Spring and the civil war in Syria, and how this might be reflected on global and local terrorism altogether. So, with no further ado, I would like to open with a generic subject matter, and this is the evolution of terrorism. I've started my research in counterterrorism and my academic engagement in this field about 30 years ago. And I was very eager to learn about the subject of terrorism because of mainly three reasons actually. One, I understood that terrorism is a growing threat which is endangering the security of the whole world. This is a growing international security threat, and therefore there is a need to explore that phenomenon. Second was understanding terrorism as one of the most interdisciplinary phenomena that one can think of. Think about any academic discipline that you have in mind, and you would find relevancy to terrorism. Psychology, sociology, political science, law, criminology, computer science, biology, chemistry, philosophy, you name it. All has to do. This is why institutes like CEVRO and ICT has, in my view, to contribute to a better understanding of this phenomenon of terrorism. This is the task, of course, of security services around the world, but academia can help and should help to understand the bigger picture of this phenomenon of terrorism and maybe to construct better policies in countering this specific phenomenon. The third reason why I decided to focus on my elderly life in dealing with this subject matter of terrorism, because of the challenge of the evolution of the phenomenon. I would argue that whatever you know today about terrorism, it may be true for today, but it changes all the time. Terrorism today is different from terrorism of tomorrow, definitely different from terrorism of the past. That's why we are always on a learning curve. We need to learn about those new challenges. And by the way, the terrorists are doing the same. They are learning the soft bellies of the democratic liberal society. They are learning about counter-terrorism policies, and it's always some kind of learning competition between the two sides. So to explain this evolution of terrorism, I would like to start with the traditional warfare. What is the traditional warfare? The war which is being conducted by two states. We refer to that as a symmetric warfare. You have a state fighting against a state, you have an army against an army, a navy against a navy, air force against an air force. That's the symmetric warfare. How do you win such a war? You win this war by the ability to defeat the operational capability of the other side, of the enemy. What does this mean, to defeat the operational capability? You need to paralyze the firepower of the other side. You need to dilute these capabilities in conducting that. If you do that, you win the war, or you won the war between two states, the symmetric war. That's the challenge, which is very difficult. As a military person will tell you, it's quite difficult in modern times. But in the midst of the 20th century, we saw the rise of a new dimension of the warfare. And the new dimension of the warfare is the asymmetric warfare. And the asymmetric warfare is a war between a state and a non-state actor, between a state and organization, for that matter, a terrorist organization. I really dislike the term asymmetric warfare, and I'll explain why in a minute, but I don't have a better term, so I still use that. In this war between a state and a non-state actor, we see a new dimension in which one needs to fight and win. The second dimension is the dimension of the motivation of the other side to keep on fighting. So in this dimension, you are trying to defeat the motivation of your enemy to keep on fighting. Not just his capability to keep on fighting, but also his motivation to keep on fighting. By the way, what does this mean, to defeat the motivation of your enemy to keep on fighting? It means deterrence. You would like to deter him. You would like to make it clear to him that it will be counterproductive for him to go on fight against you. But you also need to win the battle of the media here, because you want to win the hearts and minds, which sometimes it's in contradiction to the military fight that you are conducting. So this is really the challenge, the new dimension of modern warfare, the dimension of trying to defeat the motivation of the other side to keep on fighting. One word about the term asymmetric warfare. I already said that I really dislike the term. Why? Because when I'm saying asymmetric warfare, what really popped to your mind? Everybody who's listening to the term asymmetric warfare, what is the most typical asymmetric warfare in the history of mankind, if biblical time for that matter? It's David and Goliath. You have the Goliath, the monstrous Goliath, this monster that has weaponry until his teeth, most sophisticated, state-of-the-art type of weapons. Fighting against whom? Against this small shepherd, David, that the only thing that he has in order to defend himself are a few stones that he can throw on this monstrous Goliath. That's the story that immediately pops in our mind when we say asymmetric warfare. To say the truth, this is also the picture of the war between a state and a non-state actor, a state and a terrorist organization. Regardless how weak the state is, still it's much stronger, monstrous, compared to the terrorist organization, which is the shepherd for that matter. But the real truth is that this Goliath, the state, is handcuffed in his hands and shackled in his legs with what? With the international humanitarian law, with the Geneva Conventions, with its internal laws, with its internal liberal and democratic values. By the way, I'm not, God forbid, criticizing that. I think that every civilized person should adhere to those values, liberal democratic values. But we should not turn a blind eye to the fact that the state, which is being regarded as the strong entity, is really, when it's facing terrorist organizations, sometimes they have the lower capabilities, and it's much weaker than the organization. The organization, the terrorist organization, this so-called David, doesn't give a damn about those values. Actually, he understands those values and misuses them against the state. How does this organization, any organization, is misusing those values against the state? Because he's embedding himself in the civilian society. The terrorists are being embedded in the civilian society. The terrorist knows and would like to see that in every countermeasure that you will conduct against them, any counter-terrorism activity, you will hurt uninvolved civilians from their own constituency. And this is actually contributing to the hatred against the state, which is fighting the terrorist organization. So this is the second dimension, defeating the motivation of the other side to keep on fighting. In the recent years, we see a third dimension. And the third dimension is the legal dimension. Each side is trying to defeat the legality of the other side to keep on fighting. Meaning, the terrorist organization would like to argue that the state is an illegal entity which is using illegal measures and unlawful measures in order to defeat the organization. And by the way, the state is trying to show that the terrorist organization is an illegal entity which is conducting illegal modus operandis, terrorist activities, and so on and so forth. The real challenge of modern warfare, my friends, is not to be able to win in each one of those battlefields. The real challenge is the ability to win in those three dimensions simultaneously. Because if you win only in one dimension, you lost the whole war. Oops. If you win only one dimension, you lose the whole war. You need to win in those three elements at the same time. An organization that actually understood that quite well is Al-Qaeda. And when we analyze Al-Qaeda, I said we should understand this evolution. Al-Qaeda was a hierarchical terrorist organization prior to 9/11, 2001. Al-Qaeda had his command ship, had his mid-command, and the activists in the field. As an outcome of the American-led international campaign in Afghanistan, Al-Qaeda lost his territory. Al-Qaeda lost those capabilities and changed the structure of the organization. Right now, when we are talking about global jihad, when we talk about Al-Qaeda, we are talking about the epicenter of Al-Qaeda, which is today, as we all know, situated in Pakistan bordering Afghanistan, or Afghanistan bordering Pakistan. But this epicenter is very dangerous because it's inside, it's inspired, but it's not necessarily the one who's conducting, since 9/11, the most problematic atrocities, terrorist attacks. Around this circle, we have a satellite of organizations, and I refer to 3+1, 4, but it's 3+1. The common denominator of those three organizations are that they all adopted the name Al-Qaeda. We are talking about Akim, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, which situated mainly in Libya and fighting all over North Africa and Central Africa. AQAP, Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, which is situated mainly in Yemen and fighting in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which we're all familiar with. And the new type of Al-Qaeda organization, it still doesn't have the name Al-Qaeda. Down the road, probably they will adopt that. This is Jabhat al-Nusra, which is one of the main groups in Syria. Those organizations are affiliated to Al-Qaeda epicenter. They get orders, they communicate with Al-Qaeda, and of course they are in some cases more dangerous than Al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Afghanistan. But around this satellite organization, there is another satellite organization. And the second circle of those satellites are those local jihadi terrorist organizations in different Arab and Muslim countries, which are inspired by Al-Qaeda, but not necessarily has operational ties with the epicenter in Afghanistan. To name a few, Ansar Beit el-Maqdas in Sinai Peninsula, Abu Sayyaf in the Philippines, the jihadi, Islamic Jihad in Indonesia, Lashkar Toiba in Pakistan, El-Shabaab in Somalia, Boko Haram, which was quite active recently in Nigeria, Jaljalat, which are Palestinian Salafist terrorist organizations, the Mujahideen, the Chechen Mujahideen, and Uzbat el-Unsar in Lebanon. But there is another circle that surrounds the epicenter of Al-Qaeda. And this center actually is the most relevant to you guys, people in Europe, Czech Republic, and other countries. And this is, I don't paint that as a circle. It's more like a cloud of inspiration. And this is the cloud of inspiration that inspires homegrown terrorism, which are bad seeds among Muslim communities in the Western society. This is not the majority of the Muslims. These are small bad seeds, but very dangerous. Now, this process has been inspired by what we call, I think it's a mistake to call it, but that's the way it was nominated or being called. This is the Arab Spring process. The Arab Spring process that started about 2 years ago is nothing of a spring. Actually, what is happening is, and we see it as a pattern time and again, we see liberal reformists in those Arab countries starting this process, but immediately the one who's taking over are the most dogmatic Salafist Muslim Brotherhood elements, and they topple down the traditional regime. And what we find instead of that is an ungoverned territories with failed statehood altogether. In those ungoverned territories, the local and global jihadist elements are coming in, and they are being rooted in this region. They are getting the state-of-the-art type of weapon because they are taking over the arsenal of the state, and they start to export their terrorist activity from this specific region to neighboring countries and neighboring states altogether. The same thing is happening today in different parts of the world, and you can see many organizations that popping up, those second satellite, which is popping up in different countries altogether. When we talk about Syria, Syria is now the main concern of anyone who's analyzing the phenomenon of global and local jihadi terrorist activity. It started in March 2011 with the same pattern. The reformists started that, but then Al-Qaeda took over. At first it was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, then Jabhat al-Nusra was created. And now, to make it clear, you have different areas of conflict all over Syria. Now you think that maybe it's manageable? Just look how many splinter groups and organizations today are active in Syria as we speak, fighting in those different regions of conflict in Syria. Those are those splinter groups which are fighting. In some cases, they cooperate with each other. They create alliances. In other cases, they fight each other on top of the fact that they are fighting the Assad regime and others. Now, if we want to make some orders in this chaotic picture, this map is showing how things are practically being conducted. The brown part of the map are the Assad regime, which is supported by Iran, Revolutionary Guards, and especially Hezbollah. The green parts are the rebels, the area that the rebels control, and the yellow parts, those are the Kurdish elements, which are also very active in the region. To sum up, we should differ between 7 elements today which are active in Syria. The first element is the Sunni Salafist global jihadists which adhere to Al-Qaeda in Pakistan, to Zawahiri that is running Al-Qaeda. The second group are other Salafists which adhere to Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which now is in conflict with Al-Qaeda in Pakistan. The third groups is the Sunni Muslim Brotherhood, which is being supported by Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is trying to build a huge army right now of volunteers that would be tens of thousands of activists that will fight both Assad and the global jihadists at the same time. The fourth group are the Kurds, which I mentioned. The fifth group is the Free Syrian Army. Those are the reformists that started everything, but now they are very weak, almost neglectable altogether. Then you have two other elements, Hezbollah, which almost shifted all their manpower into Syria in order to fight for Assad regime under the demand of Iran, and of course the Assad forces. The main concern that international community has today is the concern of the foreign fighters. And here I would like to mention only one thing and give the floor to my colleagues to take it from here. What we are suffering in the last 10 years in the Western society, starting in the worst atrocity of terrorism ever, and this is the 9/11 type of attack, this is the implication of the war in Afghanistan, 79-89. Just to refresh our mind, the USSR invaded Afghanistan in order to support the pro-communist regime fighting the local jihadists, the Mujahideen. The Mujahideen called for mercenaries from all over the Arab and the Muslim world to come and join the fight against the second superpower in the world. After 10 years of fighting, they won by surprise. USSR fled from Afghanistan. The communist regime was toppled down, the Taliban took over, and then those mercenaries that came by their thousands, about a few thousands altogether, were divided into three groups. The first group, I'm talking about 89, the first group stayed in Afghanistan after the war. They were recruited by bin Laden to create the nucleus group of Al-Qaeda. The nucleus group of Al-Qaeda, the epicenter, are those Afghan veterans, Afghan alumni coming from different nationalities. The second group, after the war ended, went back to the countries which they came from. Where did they come from? They come from the Arab and Muslim countries, from Saudi Arabia, from Egypt, from Jordan, Pakistan, and so on and so forth, so many other countries, Iraq. They went there and they started to provoke jihadi attacks against the local regimes. The third group, which was very small, was those that wanted to go back to their homelands, but since they were so notorious, the regime there didn't let them come. So they asked for political asylum in the Western society, in the United States, in Britain, in Europe, in Canada, and they got the green card to come to the United States. The best example is the blind sheikh, Sheikh Omar Abdel Rahman, which in '89 was traveling to the United States. He got the green card. He opened a mosque in New Jersey. And in his mosque, he educated, he recruited, and he planned and prepared the first attack on the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers, which was blown up in 1993 by his people trying to demolish the two Twin Towers. Back then, the same thing. What is happening right now is history repeats itself, unfortunately. What we see now in Syria is exactly what happened in 79-89 in Afghanistan. But this trend is more dangerous than what happened in 79 and 89. Why? Because many of the foreign fighters are not necessarily just Muslims and Arabs that came from Arab and Muslim countries. Many of them, hundreds of them, few thousands of them actually, are coming from the Western society itself, from Muslim communities in the Western society. The security services all over the world are very concerned with it. They are monitoring them as much as they can. I would argue that they cannot monitor, even not the majority of them. And the numbers that have been published are not necessarily the right numbers. Why is that? Because those people are traveling by land from Europe to Turkey. They infiltrate to Syria, they fight there, and they go back without flights, without stamping their passports, so it's very difficult to monitor them altogether. Those people, like those previous one that came from Afghanistan, are much more trained, much more radicalized. They went as a radical Islamist. They come much more radicalized than they used to be before. They know everything about terrorism, about insurgency, about suicide attacks and activities and so on and so forth. And they know the surrounding in the Western society much better than a foreigner who's coming to this region. And what we see and what we are going to see in the future is the new wave, the new transition of the new wave of terrorism in the Western society, in Europe altogether. Last word. Those elements are fighting in a region which is saturated with non-conventional material. I refer to especially chemical weapons. Syria is the biggest arsenal of chemical weapons all over the world. Yes, most of it is now being neutralized, but terrorist organization doesn't need tons of chemical weapons. They need few kilograms. I would argue that the danger of non-conventional terrorism, of chemical terrorism, being conducted by those foreign fighters that will return back home to the Western society is a very immediate, clear, and dangerous trend that needed to be taken under consideration. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that overview, which did have pictures of the world and map of the Middle East, and not only the Syria. But as was mentioned in both presentations, the topic of Syria and the foreign fighters or the European fighters in Syria is one of the hot issues which may get even hotter in the future. Yes, Amichai is a lawyer. He's not the only lawyer in the room. We see some lawyers in the first row. And he's done a great deal of research and lecturing about the ability of Western societies to tackling those democratic dilemmas in fighting the terror, in fighting the wars, in fighting the asymmetric wars, etc. But here, the topic for him today is going now to look into the Syria, into the Middle East, and the challenges of the Middle East, the post-so-called Arab Spring environment, and what are those effects already now with regarding the territory of Europe, or the Western world, if you wish, and what we can be expecting in the future. And as was mentioned in General Schwarz's introduction or lecture, the speech, the topic of the Brussels attack a few days ago could be, once we know all the facts, exactly fitting into that category. And it may not be the last attack of its type. So please, Amichai, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Tomas. Thank you, Ivan. Sasha Vondra, thank you for having us in this beautiful space, the CEVRO Institute, in this beautiful city of yours. As you can see, we brought you the sunshine. I understand that last week it was pouring rain, so we brought you some Middle Eastern sunshine. As King Henry VIII used to say to each one of his 6 wives, rather. I don't intend to keep you very long. What I want to do is to put on the table a few ideas that we can then discuss. I think that one of the things that unites the Czech Republic and Israel, and there are many things that unite us, is that we're small countries with exceptional histories. We cannot afford to be, as we say in Israel, Israel cannot afford to be an average country. It needs to be an exceptional country in order to survive and thrive. I believe that's true of the Czech Republic as well, and I believe that we exist at a moment in history where we have to be exceptional, we have to question conventions, we have to question our assumptions about international law, about the nature of the international system, because we are really experiencing a tectonic shift in the nature of the international system right here on our doorstep, and I'll explain what I mean by that. 3.5 years ago, as the Arab Spring was getting going in December 2010, early 2011, the discourse in the Western world essentially divided into this caricature. There were those who said, this is going to be the 4th wave of global democratization. Finally, the last remaining region of the world that has so far been thoroughly impervious to the forces of democracy is beginning to open up and liberalize. How could it be elsewhere? Democracy has traveled to Central and Eastern Europe and to Latin America and to Asia and even to Sub-Saharan Africa, and the only region in the world that seemed to be stuck in old-style dictatorship was the Middle East. So this was going to be the new wave of liberalization. And let me tell you, as an Israeli, there was no nation in the world that prayed, that hoped more for rapid democratization and rapid liberalization than the people of Israel. Because we understand, just like you understand, that the best guarantee for our security is to be surrounded by a ring of well-governed, stable, democratic states. Because democratic states don't go to war against each other, they make better trade partners, they protect human rights, they protect the environment, and so on and so forth. And this was our great hope. And unfortunately, that hope has not materialized. We can maybe look at Tunisia with some degree of optimism, but if you look at the ring of countries around Israel and even the second ring of countries, and you'll see the map in a moment, we have not seen positive democratization in the way that we have hoped. But neither have we seen the realization of the Arab winter as it was conceived by the West and those in the West who saw that democracy was not on the table. People like Fuad Ajami and others, who have said what's going to happen is totalitarian, authoritarian succession. The old forms of Arab dictatorship, nationalist, secular, statist, sclerotic, are going to be swept away by a new generation of religious Arab authoritarianism, mainly led by the Muslim Brotherhood. Perhaps the greatest surprise of the last 3 years is that this scenario has also not materialized. Instead, what we see, as Boaz Ganor has mentioned, is that the Middle East and North Africa that we used to think of in these conventional Westphalian terms as being composed of nation-states not democratic, but at least functional. Egypt, until recently, was Mubarak. Mubarak ruled Egypt. Until a decade ago, Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq. The Assad family ruled Syria. Not liberally, not very nicely, but they ruled it effectively for decades. Anwar Gaddafi ruled Libya for many, many decades. So we've come to think about the Middle East as certainly undemocratic, certainly not terribly pleasant, but relatively manageable. Leaders could be deterred, diplomacy could be entered into, and Israel managed to conclude peace treaties with Egypt, with Jordan, and so on and so forth. The tectonic shift that we are seeing today in North Africa and the Middle East, and one that I believe will have global consequences, already has profound consequences that we haven't really begun to thoroughly work through, is that this world is no longer. It is a fiction. Syria does not exist as a state in any meaningful sense. Libya does not exist as a state in any meaningful sense. Iraq does not exist as a state in any meaningful sense. And the list goes on and on. Somalia, Libya, Yemen. Again, the list goes on and on. The functioning Westphalian sovereign state has become a real rarity in this vast geographic space between Marrakesh and Bangladesh. And so the world is looking much more like this. And this reality has profound consequences, not only for terrorism, not only for our immediate security interests, but for international institutions that depend on the idea that the world is composed of functioning sovereign states, for international law, for the laws of war, and so on and so forth. This reality is one of a proliferation of areas of limited statehood, where centralized state authority diminishes, and where we see the rise of what Boaz described as hybrid terrorist organizations. I would call them non-state armed governors, who are filling in the vacuum that is being created, not just in the Eastern Mediterranean, but look at Mali, look at Chad. And the spillover effects, the regional spillover effects are enormous. We see this arc of instability being created. States are increasingly unable to provide essential public goods to their citizens. So what do their citizens do? They turn to non-state armed groups to provide them with security. They turn to Hezbollah, they turn to Hamas, they turn to the Muslim Brotherhood, they turn to the Salafists to provide them with essential public goods. States are no longer perceived by their populations as being legitimate, and therefore people look for alternative sources of legitimacy, tribal, religious, ethnic. States are no longer able to provide basic conditions of security, and so people are turning to alternative sources of authority, and that creates a vast new opportunity, which I believe we are only now beginning to see the consequences of, for alternative governors for these non-state violent armed groups. Now, in other parts of the world, especially in Europe, but also in Latin America and to some degree in Asia, where the state recedes, we have positive alternative governors that can step in. When the Balkans collapsed into chaos and civil war, NATO, the OSCE, Europe had institutions that could come in and set up international trusteeships. One of the tragedies of the Middle East is that we lack alternative, positive governors. There is no NATO in the Middle East. There is no European Union in the Middle East. There is no OSCE in the Middle East. And so the only ones who are really capable of exploiting this huge contestation for governance, this competition that is going on. It's an ideological competition. It is an organizational competition. It's a competition for hundreds of millions of people and for huge amounts of territory. The only people who are in a position to exploit this today in the Middle East are the radicals, are the fundamentalists. And the Arab Spring has turned out to provide these vast new opportunities for radical groups, and it will take them time. They will have to figure out how to govern. Al-Qaeda has a very bad governance record. But as Boaz has also mentioned, these guys are on a learning curve. And they have Hezbollah and they have Hamas to teach them how to become governance actors, how to become economic actors. Think about the consequences. If only 10% of these organizations that you saw, this huge list of organizations, and that was just Syria and Iraq. Think about what's happening in Mali. Think about what's happening in Libya. If they learn how to govern, how many more people can they radicalize? How much more resources can they muster through arms trafficking, drug trafficking, trading in human beings, and other activities to really pose a dramatic threat? So the fact that we are now living in relative tranquility and so forth may very well be the quiet before the storms. Why should you care living in this beautiful, peaceful island called the European Union, and especially the Czech Republic? Well, 4 main reasons. 2 of them have already been mentioned. I'll just touch upon them briefly. Foreign fighters. The most conservative assessments that we have are that there are about between 8,000 and 12,000 foreign fighters in Syria alone fighting today. More liberal estimates go as much as 15 or 16,000 people. Again, if only 10% of those manage to come back into Europe, you have a problem on a scale that you have never experienced before. But it's not just the foreign fighters themselves. The chaos drives people away. And I just saw figures on illegal immigration from Libya alone into particularly Italy and Spain over the last couple of years. In 2013, it is estimated that 40,000 Libyans illegally crossed the border into Italy and Spain. Already this year, in the middle of the year 2014, it is estimated that a similar number, between 38 and 42,000, have crossed the border illegally. Most of these people are coming for economic reasons. They're driven away. But if we see these areas of chaos and conflict expand, and civil war ignited in other parts of North Africa and the Middle East, we are likely to see many more of these immigrants crossing the border illegally into Europe. As I say, most of them are not going to be involved in terrorism, at least not immediately. But they will at least facilitate the arrival of other problems, including organized crime that feeds into these networks that are being developed in the Middle East. But I also want to point out to you that the vision of groups like Jabhat al-Nusra, like ISIS, the beheadings, the crucifixions, the murder of women and children, that is happening in places like Syria affects who we are and what kind of societies we are. And here too, the Czech Republic and Israel are tragically united by a history where we know that if we turn a blind eye to mass human rights atrocities, to huge amounts of sexual violence against women and girls in North Africa and the Middle East, if we accept, even tacitly, the legitimacy of Al-Qaeda becoming a governance actor, we are giving up on our own values. We are giving up on the liberal international order, which we have spent decades, perhaps centuries, constructing. And I know that what I'm saying is radical and rather unsettling. The liberal international order that we have struggled to build, that's built on democracy, on free trade, on the idea that the world is composed of sovereign, responsible nation states that take care of their citizens and are able to cooperate and solve problems together internationally. That very system is beginning to be challenged. It's challenged not just by Mr. Putin, but also by the rise of these non-state armed governors who are becoming a real player in the international system. And Europe should also be concerned because Europe, like the United States, like the United Nations, like the World Bank, at the moment, completely lacks a policy to know what to do about this reality. We are coming up to the 10th anniversary of the European Neighbourhood Policy, a policy that was set up for the European Union as the key vehicle of the European Union to try to promote security and stability in North Africa and the Middle East. Ask a senior commission official or a commissioner, what do you do about these non-state armed groups? What do you do about these failed states? Does the European Union have a strategy? And there's just embarrassed silence. Nobody has a clue. How do you gather actionable intelligence, ask a NATO official, on a group like ISIS or Jabhat al-Nusra? It's a very different exercise from gathering intelligence on a state. We are being outpaced in terms of innovation and thinking about globalization by Hezbollah, Hamas, and Al-Qaeda. We are still living in the 20th century. These guys are exploiting the soft underbelly of the 21st century. And so we really need to wake up and think where we go from here. We need to understand that we are facing a systemic crisis. We need to develop mechanisms of what I would call active containment. We need to bring to bear not only hard security measures, but also our development policy, our thinking about UN reform, World Bank reform, reform of EU external relations, so that we are better able to prevent contagion and spillover, preserve islands of stability, and deal with these new threats that are coming upon us. We need new legal thinking. Boaz has rightly mentioned the rise of asymmetrical war. There are almost no conventional wars occurring in the world anymore. Very few. The number of civil wars and the number of cross-border conflicts involving non-state armed groups has skyrocketed over the last 20 years. And yet we still rely on the old Geneva Conventions, pretending that we live in a world that simply does not exist anymore from the point of view of international institutions and international law. Last but not least, we need to think about the values of our own society. The West, the free, prosperous, healthy West that we live in today was not given to us for free. It is a product of centuries of institutional development, of men and women who've given their lives to create free and prosperous societies. And unless we take responsibility to reinvigorate the spirit of the West, the spirit of Europe, the spirit of Israel, and to stand up to what is essentially a new totalitarian movement that is inimical to our values as human beings. It is anti-human rights, it is anti-women's rights, it is anti-gay and lesbian rights. It is threatening our way of life. Unless we take that stance, we're going to be repeating history and the mistakes of history. I believe that we have not lost the battle. Power, legitimacy is still on our side, but we need to understand the changing nature of the environment and the changing nature of the challenges that we face together. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Eitan Azani has been the only Israeli who has been testifying in Brussels regarding the Hezbollah, and if there is someone who really knows, or someone from a tiny group of people who really know and study the Hezbollah, which has not been mentioned, by the way, that many times here, because since we have talked more about the Sunni jihadism, then it's Eitan Azani. To those former heads of the military intelligence sitting here, and it's not only one, it's two of them. Eitan was commander of Boaz, so you see that they have switched the commanding posts. And I welcome Eitan here now, but to talk about, not that much about Hezbollah, but maybe it's going to be mentioned, but to talk about the cyber and cyber issues of terrorism, which is basically the new field, new growing field, and to get some refreshing ideas also from that point of view, from that perspective. Please.
Thank you, Tomas, in asking me not to talk about Hezbollah and asking me to talk about different other issues. What I try to describe in the coming 15 to 20 minutes is an analysis that was made by our team during the 4 last years of monitoring the jihadi websites, jihadi discussions, trying to understand the mindset of the jihadists and the use of the jihadists of what we call cyber terror, the use of the internet. And we will share you some of these analysis and understanding, and also some of examples that we can bring from this involvement of the jihadists in the cyber arena. For the jihadists themselves, it is not a cyber war. It's not a cyber war, it's something else. They call it electronic jihad. Why they call it electronic jihad? Because it's part, using the internet for any operation, if it's an operation of an offensive operation or a defensive operation, is part of what we call jihad. And they analyze and they publish from time to time what we call the fatwas, the religious fatwas, regarding the use of the internet to carry out jihad against the enemies. As you can see here, the Minister of War of the Iraqis, of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, published in 2010, what should be the target of this electronic jihad, and you can see the target of this electronic jihad should be military, economic target, and entering into the enemy website. And it's not something that only published by the jihadi in Iraq, it's something that was part of Al-Qaeda's 7 phases strategy, meaning the organization from the early days of after 9/11, 24, 25, started to promote the idea of using the internet as a tool to carry out an attack. And how it operates. When it comes to the electronic jihad, we divided the operation within this area of the internet into 3 major areas. One, we call it the operation and propaganda. And within the preparation of the propaganda, this is the main content that the jihadists use the internet for their operation, for the military, for the terrorist operation, for training issues, for intelligence, fundraising issues, and also communication between the jihadi group. Meaning, the internet is one of the most important systems for jihadists to operate within their circle, because they went global. They are not operating in a local arena, and they use the internet for these kinds of operations. This is one of the major components within the use of the internet. The second component is the defensive issues that they use the internet to defend their audience in different and their actors in different parts around the world. And when it comes to defense, there are two levels of defense. One is the organizational level of defense of providing software around the jihadi website and jihadi forums to defend these jihadi groups. On the other side is personal level of defense, meaning providing software for the personal people that are served within the jihadi website or within the jihadi forum. But it's not only a software, it's also a knowledge. How should I act within these networks? Should I use this place twice or not? All these kinds of issues, you can find it within the jihadi forum and jihadi website. The next component of the jihadic use of the internet, this is what we call the offense. There is an offense from the organizational level, meaning they try to find out different groups, to assemble groups within the organization, groups of hackers, group of people that belong to this arena to carry out an operation. And there is a personal level of using an offensive operation, and we will discuss it maybe later. They use software and knowledge. They disseminate knowledge regarding targets of the offense via the internet and via their forum. During the years, what we find out, the jihadists established some component or some group that were involved in this operation of electronic jihad. The Electronic Jihad Battalion, the Electronic Jihad Army, Jihadist Internet Hacking Brigade, and different hackers that took part with these operations on the ground in different parts around the world. So if you want to see the comprehensive picture of using the internet, this is the comprehensive picture that gives us an understanding how they use the internet and for what purposes. The internet as a platform for operation, you will have here the four issues that the jihadists use the internet for their operation. One is the media outlet. When they established their film and they operated on the ground, every group from the central command of Al-Qaeda into the different field actors of Al-Qaeda, they have a media outlet. The second component that they use, this is what we call the jihadi forum. They have the internal discussions of different groups, of different surfers that are operating within this arena. During the last years, there were a very important component that used by the jihadists to promote ideas, knowledge, and this is the digital magazines. The global digital magazine that's used by the jihadists, not only in Arabic and in Pashtun, also in English, because they want to reach to people in the West that speak in English language. And we see during the last years also entrance of the jihadists into the social media, meaning they use the social media for their own campaign. And every area or every group or every theaters of jihad has its own media outlet that publish the information of these theaters of jihad. I just want to say something about the El-Mulachem. This is the media outlet of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, well known by his publishing the Inspire magazine in English that came from this area. But it's not only Al-Qaeda in Yemen, it's Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, it's Al-Shabaab in Somalia. Every field commanders of Al-Qaeda in the theaters of jihad want to have these capabilities. What Al-Qaeda published within its own website, it's a manual about dealing with different issues. One of the manuals that was published was called Al-Qaeda Airline. It was a series of manuals that describe a lot of operations that Al-Qaeda should carry out and has also a topic that came from the issues of poisons, all the different areas of operation, meaning issues that connected to a way that these are people that prepare a non-conventional operations by using the information that's published by the Al-Qaeda manual. Another component that we need to see, and it's something that connected to the homegrown in the West, it's the digital magazine publish information for young people, homegrown in the West, how to carry out a jihadic operation, how to use their home issues to prepare a bomb in the mother kitchen, and how to carry out safe jihad, safe terror in the West. All this information you see for the lone mujahid, meaning from the lone wolf pocketbook that was assembled and collected by Al-Qaeda leadership in Yemen for members that can be recruited outside Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. Another example that this time is from Pakistan, Afghanistan, when the groups, the jihadi groups in Pakistan, Afghanistan understood the importance of the English magazine of Al-Qaeda in Yemen that called Inspire, they started to publish an English magazine that called Azan. And within this English magazine, they tried to promote and to to call potential audience in the West. Meaning, we want you not to come from the West to carry out an attack in Pakistan, Afghanistan. What we want you to do is to carry out an operation on your area using this kind of tool to carry out this kind of operation. And what they gave these groups, they gave them a contact information. And within the contact information, this is something that we need to understand regarding the jihadists. They give them an email address, and they give them also a public code key. And you see the public code key on the bottom of this slide. Meaning you can contact us safely by using this software, and you can contact us without any ability of any organization to capture you. The other component that we can see, the use of the internet for operation, this is a project that was run by the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, and the project was to recruit suicide bombers to carry out suicide bombing operations in the West. The name of the project was Convoy of Martyrs. The same system worked also here. What was the same system? We will give you a public key. We will give you an address. You will contact us. You will contact the Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. We will support you, whatever you want, money, IEDs, training, whatever you want. Just be part of this project that they called it Convoy of Martyrs. In 2013, I think that they have some problems with this Convoy of Martyrs, so they published stopping the communication in the project of Convoy of Martyrs. Why? Maybe, they were exposed to a security agency, so they stopped the project. Some months afterwards, we see another project of the same group that is called Convoy of Martyrs 2, meaning we open again for you through the system of the using the internet by the public key, contact us and be part of this operation. Call for Jihad. They use the internet not only for recruiting people, they use the internet also to get information, suggestions from people in different parts around the world regarding issues that are very problematic in the eyes of the jihadists. And one of their problems was the drone chain that carried out an attack in Pakistan. So you can see within the digital magazine, they approach their audience and ask for information for their audience how to deal with the phenomenon of the drone attack that was carried out against their people and against the leadership in this area. Intelligence. They use the internet for intelligence operation in different issues to have a basic intelligence operation, operational intelligence issues, cyber intelligence. As you can see, they publish on the internet a strategic map. It was published in 2009, not only today, but we have the same issue. Strategic map of targets of NATO, targets in United States, targets in Israel, strategic targets in Pakistan, meaning they share information via the internet for their audience in different parts around the world. What are the strategic components that you can carry out an attack against them? The next component within the jihadi courses, this is a very unique information. In October 2012, they share information within the jihadi forum regarding a website. This website was flightradar24.com. And they gave information to their audience that in this website, you can find out what is the real picture of the flight all over the world. You can find the information, what is the right information about every aircraft, from where he started his operation and where he will landed. So, and they said we can use this kind of information for our operation, gathering information about delegations or people that are in some flight and using our capabilities to carry out an attack down the road when this flight from one place to the other place. In December 2013, Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula carried out an attack on the complex of what they call it, the Ministry of Defense complex. What is important in our view regarding this attack is the Al-Qaeda, after they finished the attack, 2 months after they finished the attack, they published a film. They share information about the attack itself. And you can see some pictures that was taken from this film. It shows what are the targets of the attack, what is the compound. It shows how they want to carry out this kind of attack during this time, meaning using a car bomb, using people that infiltrate into the target itself. And they share information, as you can see here from their clip, they share information about the intelligence that they gather before the attack itself. And they also share information about the conversation, the communication during the attack itself. Meaning you can gather an information from this website that give you an understanding how the organization operates. This is one example of attack that was carried out in Yemen in 2013. Regarding the defense, the work assumptions of the jihadist group is that the internet is always under the attack and it's under the scrutiny of intelligence agencies, and they need to protect their operation via the internet. This is one issue. And they understand that they need to protect the internet in two levels. In the level of the group, by encoding program and to protect the level of the group, and protection in the level of the personnel, because there were a lot of information that showed that people that operate within the jihadi forums were captured by security agencies, so they try to promote the issues of protection at the level of the personnel in different areas. What they published regarding this operation, they published a book. They call it a book of terror, translated into English. One of the chapters of this book was Internet Security. In every jihadi forums today that you enter into the jihadi forum, you will find out security issues that give you an understanding that they are really under pressure regarding what's happened with the security issues. As I mentioned before, they felt that they have a lot of weaknesses within the internet itself. So as you can see here, since 2009, some of the jihadi forums were attacked by Western agencies. They collapsed and they tried to revenge. This is a call within the jihadi groups, jihadi forums, to revenge because the Western security agencies caused the collapse of some of the jihadi forums. They established or published a software. They call it Asrar al-Mujahideen 2, a software that was published by the groups that belong to the global Islamic media. This software was used in different areas around the world. They send information via the internet how to use it. They publish a clip about it. They publish it in the digital magazine. They had different versions of this Asrar al-Mujahideen, meaning they spend a lot of effort to defend their internet tools and website. The other component that they published and they developed, this is something that I mentioned before for the individuals, different software that used by the individuals to save their kind of operations on the ground. During the last year, we found more and more information that was disseminated via the internet to the jihadi surfers to use the Tor software. Use Tor software used inside the dark web, but also within the internet. So we have a lot of information that they try to publish regarding Tor software. Offense, what we can say very clearly that the jihadist groups had a high motivation to carry out an attack against the target, against us. What we can say also that the jihadi groups, and this is the reason why we enter into this process 4 years ago, jihadi groups had a learning curve. They learn from other actors in the field. They learn from international crime actors. They learn from organizations that are supported by state. And we can say that the jihadi groups, not those who are supported by state like Hezbollah and like others, the jihadi groups today has a low capability, although they have a high motivation to carry out a cyber attack. So our short-time estimation, there will not be a dramatic changes within their own capabilities to carry out an attack within the arenas of the internet. What we can say also that 50% of the cyber attack today are against financial institutions. The jihadists are operating also there. They want to capture money from a bank account or even from electronic money to make more money to run the organization operations. What we can see also that terrorist groups, in some cases even those that are supported by the level of the state, involved in this kind of cooperation, and also terrorist group and criminals networks are operating together not only in the real world, also operating together in the virtual world when it comes to money, and they have the same target to make more money and to the organization itself. We should bear in our mind that we can find out the jihadists that operating in the virtual world, but at the same time in the real world. Not only in the virtual world, using information from the virtual world to carry out operations on the real world itself. There are some different hacker groups and that are operating within the jihadic arena. There are independent members like Irhab 007 that was arrested in the United Kingdom, a jihadi hacker that used the internet to make money for the jihadi group. Global jihadists, as we said before, try to establish groups that give them the ability to carry out an attack, like the Electronic Jihad Battalions, Electronic Jihad Army, and Jihadist Internet Hacking Brigade. We have some group that's sponsored by the level of the state, like Hezbollah Cyber Group, supported by the Iranian. Remember Imad Group, Imad meaning Imad Mughaniyah, it was the head of the Jihad Council of Hezbollah. Remember Imad Mughaniyah also sponsored by a state. We have Iranian groups, Parashtu, Iranian Cyber Army, and the Shian groups that are involved in these kind of operations. And we have also the Syrian electronic armies. What we find out during the last years that there were an anonymous group that took part in some of the offense that carried out by the jihadists themselves. So we have an anonymous group, and we had an Arabs or a Muslims anonymous group that are carried out this kind of operation, and they publish it also afterward. What they carried out within the offensive type and goals of the jihadists, what they are carried out is a small-scale attack, only caused the collapse of the site. They use the internet for generating money. They carried out in some places simultaneous attack. They have a partial success in simultaneous attack. So they try to recruit hackers from different arenas within the jihadi group to be part of this simultaneous attack. They publish information via the internet by radical hackers in the jihadi website, instructions on hacking and all these kinds of issues. And the preferred attack target in their eyes, these are government websites, media websites. Just some of attack that was carried out by the jihadists. You can see here, this is the list, 2009, some attack that was carried out by the jihadist brigades, 2010, some of attack that carried out by these groups, 2011, and also suggestions to establish an Al-Qaeda electronic army to take part in the war in Syria. If I need to put our analysis on one slide, I can see that there is a slide that shows on the right part, on the left part, the capabilities and down the frequency of the attack. And you can see that there is low capabilities, high capabilities, and low frequency and high frequency. The level of the threat is along the red line. As you can see, state has high capabilities, but state involved in a cyber attack only in the time of war. So they are not the most higher place of the level of the state. In our view, the jihadi groups that sponsored by the state cause the a high level of the threat. And the second part of this high level of the threat, we have the international criminals. In the low level, we have criminals and hackers. As you can see, level of the threat is motivation plus capability, multiple of the frequency of the attack. So in the level of when it's time of war, state became the most problematic and the most stronger actor in this field, and terrorists, what we can find out, or we can see, that they have a learning curve capabilities. They learn all the time. They try to take part with these kinds of operations on the internet. So if I need to conclude what I'm just described until now, first I use Dr. Boaz Ganor equation. Terror is operational capability plus motivation. When it comes to the jihadist group, the question is not who, what, and when. When they will have the technology, when they will have the knowledge, and they train the team, they will use it for operational capability. So we need we need to understand that we have an evolving threat from the jihadists that use the internet not only for operation, not only for defense, also for offensive operation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We still have some time, and as promised, I will open the floor for the discussion or for the questions. So I would ask for the microphone so that you prepare your questions. But I still would like to ask one thing, which is regarding the recent Brussels attack. I would ask Boaz to comment on it, and if then General Schwarz wants to say something which is of course not classified, but which he can contribute to the discussion, that would be great. Boaz, please.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, since it's still being under investigation, I think we should be very cautious in our analysis. But if the person that they already captured is the right person, and as it seems right now, because he was captured red-handed, it seems that he fits to the profile of Mohammed Meri that was acting in France a few years ago, and it actually fits to the profile of the homegrown terrorists that have been radicalized. In this case, he was radicalized in the jail itself, which is another very common phenomenon, which you see people which are being engaged in petty crimes, getting into the jail, being radicalized in the jail, getting the protectorate of the Islamists in the jail. They are coming outside as active Islamists. In this case, he was traveling to Syria, was even more radicalized there, was connected probably to ISIS. This is the fraction which is part of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, which is fighting in Syria today. And when he came back, he was looking for a worthy target. What is, I think, very interesting from a Czech perspective to look at that was that this person decided not to act in France itself. So probably he took under consideration the fact that he might be followed by the security services. If this is the case, I would argue that states which are not necessarily in Europe, which are not necessarily known by the fact that they have large Muslim communities with bad seeds that are sending radicals to Syria, might think that they are safe, but then again, those activists that will return to neighboring countries in Europe might decide that it's easier for them to be active on the soil of another country and not in their own country altogether. I think this is, if this was the case this time, it's an alert that the European community should take under consideration. It stressed once again that terrorism has no borders. The terrorism is crossing borders, and terrorism is a local, regional, and global threat.
So if I may some comment also, one concerning this case, and maybe a couple of words about, as was mentioned by Boaz, the influence or warning for Czech Republic. Firstly, even if the case is still under investigation, one of the main questions will be the motivation is this attacker, and maybe it will let us to another sources, another perspective this case. Second is, as was mentioned, not only by intelligence but also by open sources, Mr. Nemouche, or this possible attacker, was under surveillance of our French colleagues, but because of the huge number of such kind of persons who were returning back from Syria, such kind of surveillance was not, let's say perfect. And third is, as Boaz mentioned, the warning for Czech Republic, and I mentioned it also during my presentation or opening speech, this threat of lone wolves. In the eyes of such kind of person, is Czech or can be Czech Republic seen as something like substitutional target, let's say, because we are a member of NATO, we are a member of European Union, we had our forces in Iraq, we still have our forces in Afghanistan, we have on Czech territory something as an old Jewish town in Prague. So the perspectives, or seeing as a perspective target in eyes such kind of terrorists, such kind of madmen, is probably increasing. And of course, as I mentioned also, as a warning in the end, still the organization and intelligence and security measures which was made in the past since the Velvet Revolution are not still perfect. So sorry, I can't be more positive, but it's a reality.
So please, may I open the floor to the questions or short comments? If anyone who wishes to ask a question or put up a comment, then please identify yourself. Daniel Kummerman, I can identify for you.
Can you hear me? All right. This need of recodification of international law, this idea has been on for some 15 years as far as I can remember. So is there any chance, do you see any legal group that would take up the challenge and bring up some early ideas and try to push it through?
Thank you. That probably goes to Amichai. Just to Daniel Kummerman is our former ambassador in Israel, besides the other functions he has had.
Yes. Well, first of all, let me mention that on both sides of the international humanitarian law debate, so I will say the security folks and then maybe also the people within the International Committee of the Red Cross and Amnesty International and so forth, there is a lively debate about how far the existing legal structures can be stretched, how far should they be stretched in order to accommodate this new reality. And there is a philosophical and a legal debate about whether we need new rules or the existing rules can be adjusted, and that's an ongoing debate. Let me give you one example, just briefly, if I may, just to make this more concrete. The Geneva Convention, in essence, divides fighters or divides people into two categories. One is combatants, okay? And under the Geneva Conventions, combatants are immediately granted prisoner of war status and prisoner of war privileges, because the basic assumption is that the war is a short-term event, it's an abnormal event, and after war comes peace and the establishment of peace, and you return the prisoners, and that's it. Okay, so you have combatants who are automatically given prisoner of war status, okay, and they are entitled to all sorts of privileges. You cannot interrogate them. They don't need to give you any information other than their rank and serial number. You have to provide them with cigarettes according to the Geneva Conventions. You have to provide them with Swiss francs so they can buy chocolate in the local store. That kind of stuff. It's very antiquated, okay? And then on the other hand, you have what's called protected persons. You have civilians whom you cannot target. There is one caveat. It's called DPH, direct participants in hostility. This was a caveat that was put into the Geneva Convention to provide for a third possibility of people who are not prisoners of war. They don't wear uniforms, they're not legal combatants, and yet they're not civilians. But it's a very, very narrow exception, for obvious reasons. As lawyers will know, when you create an exception, you always try to create a very, very narrow exception. And there are all sorts of huge restrictions about when can you target someone who's basically a civilian but has now become a participant in hostilities. The entire legal edifice of fighting non-state armed groups from the Western point of view relies on this concept of direct participation in hostilities. So let me give you an example. Let's say what direct participation in hostilities says is that you can target somebody who is actually in the physical act of attacking you. Okay? The idea was that if you were an army, let's say, arriving in France, and the local militia would organize with, sticks and stones and would attack you, you would not be defenseless. They would not count as civilians. You are able to defend yourself. But in the 21st century, we use this DPH to justify attacks against groups like Hezbollah or Hamas or Al-Qaeda. Now, so the exception is that you can only, for example, attack them once they carry out the attack. And so what do you do, for example, with a guy who lives in a southern village in Lebanon, okay? He wears civilian clothes. He's a farmer during the day, and at night he fires Hezbollah rockets against Israel. So he wakes up in the morning and he goes to the rocket, he puts the rocket on the timer, and then he goes back home and goes back to work in the field. When can you target this guy? Can you target him when he's on the way to firing the rocket? Can you target him only when he is touching the rocket? Can you target him 2 hours after he's put the rocket on a clock? I mean, it's almost funny, but these are the kind of legal issues that we take very seriously in Israel, because we are trying to operate within a legal system that is really, really antiquated. And so one of the main areas of development, I think, needs to be of how do we deal with these non-state armed groups like Hezbollah, like Hamas, who are not states on the one hand, and yet at the same time, just operating within this DPH exemption just doesn't give us the legal tools of having to deal with this. This is just one example of the kind of debates that are taking place.
Well, by the way, as Czechs, we have the experience with such dilemmas from Afghanistan, with our special forces fighting them without caveats. Of course, that was one of the spaces where we have entered that arena and where those dilemmas were also being asked. It's not on the home front, but in the exposure of our special forces, definitely we have come to that as well. Other questions? I've seen... Please, Pani
Hromádková. I'm a former ex-lecturer of Charles University, so I very appreciate the topic, why nations need memory. We have got many deficiencies in this respect, so I wonder how we shall mediate your fascinating experience, concerns, and responsibility, not only for the Middle East, but Europe as well. So I believe in a role of modern historians, because I can't imagine that Czech people who are very slow to understand defense policies and purely military point of view, how to influence the public opinions without a deeper reflection of anti-Semitism. For instance, Prague has been very influenced by Heidegger, the philosopher who is now a sort of fashion in Germany. His Schwarze Hefte are de facto a very subtle and very, let's say, smart defense of disapproval with Jewish culture, policies, etc. So I see a lot of work for modern historians, political scientists, who are really doing political science, history, and political aspects and cultural aspects of the problem of the topics you presented so well. So many thanks, but I'm very skeptical how to educate Czech audience to understand own self-interests, which are so comparable with those you presented so well. So thank you very much indeed.
Any reaction? What?
Thank you for the question. I think it actually goes back, and I appreciate the fact that you are coming from a high position of Czech University. I think that your question reflects the role that the academia has to take in this respect. And it should be a joint effort of historians, it should be philosophers, it should be Middle Eastern experts, it should be international relation experts, and I can mention so many different type of academic professions that has to deal with this question. There are so much things that needed to be dealt with and discussed. You know, for the last, 2 hours we are talking about terrorism. What is terrorism? There is no one objective definition of the term terrorism. At least this is an effort that the academia can and should contribute. I myself was writing about the need for a definition, an objective definition of terrorism about 25 years ago, and I'm still debating that with my own scholarly community. I would argue, and just to set that as a milestone, I would argue that the definition of terrorism should be short and precise and very objective. The definition that I use is terrorism is the deliberate use of violence aimed against civilians in order to achieve political goals. Now, that's very, very narrow, but very clear message. So it's not biased. It doesn't mean that Muslims or Islamists necessarily has to do that, or Jews or Christians. Everybody can do that. Of course, there is another question: can state conduct acts of terrorism? And the answer would be a very typical Jewish answer: yes and no. What do I mean by that? Yes, states can do harms like organizations, maybe even more than organizations. They might kill innocent civilians as terrorist organizations are doing, and maybe even more than that. No, we don't need to define what states are doing as terrorist acts, because already it's being defined by the Geneva Conventions and the international humanitarian law. If they do those bad deeds and those activities, it's being defined as war crimes and crimes against humanity. The paradox is that when states are doing those activities, they can be condemned, can be prosecuted, and so on and so forth. But there is no agreement when sub-states and non-state organizations are doing it, as was mentioned by my colleague Amichai. And this is one basic subject matter that needed to be discussed and solved, and it can be solved. Once you will have an objective definition of the term, you can have an overall agreement upon what is right and what is wrong, and you can have a lively discussion among Czech constituency, among European constituency, among Western constituency, among the whole world constituency, including third worlds. You know what? I would argue that even terrorists, once there will be a clear threshold, which means the deliberate attacks against civilians should be forbidden under all circumstances. Even if you have a just cause, even if you have a holy cause, you don't have the right to deliberately target civilians. This moral debate will infiltrate into the terrorist communities themselves, because already they ask those questions: is it right or is it wrong? To end my answer, I don't know if I'm optimistic or pessimistic, by saying that I can almost guarantee to you, American would say, read my lips. I can almost guarantee to you that these discussions, those questions, will wake up the Western society at the end of the day. Europe will wake up, different states in Europe will wake up, leaders will wake up. How I'm so certain about that? Because I'm very certain that terrorism is not going to disappear. Terrorism is actually, as I mentioned in my presentation, is going to be worse than it used to be before. It's probably going to use non-conventional capabilities, and then all those politics and different types of self-illusions will disappear, and the international community will have to conduct real international cooperation, real European cooperation, in order to jointly counter this vicious network which is threatening the world and Europe altogether.
There was one other question, which I've seen some hand rising. Please. So we will take the two questions together, since our time is running.
So, Danikovsky, I would like to ask, what are your scenarios for Syria then? If you can suggest something, because the picture is quite grey, and yeah, thank you.
Slečno, tady ještě jedna otázka. Děkuji.
Jan Beneš from Charles University. I have a question regarding the Al-Qaeda strategy, because Al-Qaeda's actual contemporary leader, Ayman Zawahiri, once wrote that although the global insurgency, the global jihad network has a worldwide reach, but that Al-Qaeda finds Middle East as the center of their activities. And now, when there is a, as you have said it, the arc of instability in the Middle East, and in Middle East is in the middle of chaos and political changes, so that Al-Qaeda should focus on the very core of the Middle East. So do you think that now there is any probability of Al-Qaeda conducting an attack on the far enemy, an organized attack on Europe or United States in the time where there is a battle over the core of the Middle East? Thank you.
Let me just say a couple of sentences on each of those. In Syria, I think that there are three main scenarios, and then a possible mixture of each one of these three. Okay, let me just outline them quickly. One is a gradual but eventually complete clawback of control by the Assad regime of Syria. Okay, and at the moment, 18 months ago, it looked as if things were looking really bad for Assad. Things are looking, from his perspective, much better. It's not over yet. The rebels are still able to fight, and they're still receiving money and training and input from the outside. But one scenario will be a gradual recovery of regime control of Syria. The second scenario is long-term chaos, okay? If you look at videos, and you can look them online, if you look at cities like Hama and Homs, it makes Mogadishu look like Monaco, okay? I mean, there are areas of Syria that are so deeply devastated that it could take decades for Syria to return to anything like functionality, and we may very well see some kind of mixture of Al-Qaeda-controlled areas, regime-controlled areas, free Syrian armies-controlled areas, Kurdish warlords, organized crime, basically a kind of Balkanization, a kind of Afghanistanization of Syria for a very, very long time. Just to mention in this context, I saw a report by two very fine economists that estimated that if Syria's civil war ended tomorrow and Syria were to grow by 6% of GDP per year for the next 30 years, okay, that's very high levels of economic growth. It would take 30 years for Syria's GDP to go back to what it was in 2010. I mean, this is how deeply devastated Syria is. So the second scenario, long-term chaos. The third scenario is some kind of division of Syria into alternative political entities. We could see the appearance of a de facto or a de jure Kurdish state in the northeastern corner of Syria. We could see the de facto creation or even a de jure creation of an Alawite statelet as a means of protecting the Alawite minority, the Assad family in the north-western corner, the Latakia and Mediterranean and we can see the sort of the de facto or de jure division of Syria, or we could see some kind of combination of each one of these three main scenarios. Regarding Al-Qaeda, I think your question is a very prescient one. I think it's a very important one, because we have to understand that the long-term ideology of Al-Qaeda has not changed. The dream of establishing an Islamic caliphate under Sharia law is the strategic goal of Al-Qaeda Central and the affiliates. But then there is a question of strategy and tactics. And so what your question indicates is that perhaps there is a strategic, tactical decision by Al-Qaeda and its affiliates at the moment to advance the ultimate goal of caliphate creation, not by attacks on the far enemy, but by focus on the near enemy. And I think that it's fair to say that Al-Qaeda and its affiliates view the chaos, state failure, and collapse of centralized Arab state authority in North Africa and the Middle East as a wonderful opportunity to realize their dream. And so the lack of attacks, and not that there haven't been any attempts, there have been attempts, but the lack of a major effort of attacks against the West may be the result, A, of the diminished capacity of Al-Qaeda Central in Afghanistan and Pakistan to actually carry out attacks, but also perhaps a short and medium-term tactical decision by Al-Qaeda's affiliates in North Africa and the Middle East to exploit the situation in North Africa and the Middle East and focus on those apostate regimes in order to better advance the overarching goal of Al-Qaeda, which is to establish this caliphate. Let me just remind you that in, I believe it was December 2001, so just a few months after 9/11, Ayman al-Zawahiri, the current leader of Al-Qaeda, published a fatwa in which he said there will be a two-phase solution of establishment of a caliphate in the Middle East. The first stage will be Egypt, and then we will use Egypt as a base to expand the caliphate in the Middle East. So perhaps he didn't get the country right, but perhaps today it is Syria rather than Egypt that is the most convenient, and Syria and Iraq that is the most convenient for Al-Qaeda to try to realize its overarching vision.
Yeah.
I will add a short reflection. Actually, you are witnessing right now to a very unique historical moment when two Israelis agrees on one subject matter. So usually when you put two Israelis in one room, you have 4 opinions.
I will ask Eitan to comment.
Okay. But this time I tend to agree with what Amichai said. But having said that, I want to add a few observations. Although I buy the 3 main scenarios that Amichai have just suggested, I would argue that the future would be witness to the question, which one of those scenarios would happen. It would not be an outcome of what is happening right now in Syria or in Syria itself. This would be an external decision, what will be the future of Syria. And when I say external decision, it's a combination of many actors which today they are pouring the oil to the fire in Syria. Without them, the situation would have been ended this way or the other way, way before. And I refer to Iran, which has a crucial role in what's happening in Syria today. I refer to Russia, who has a crucial role. I refer to Saudi Arabia, which has a growing role and will have a growing role. I refer to Turkey, and in a way also to the Arab League. Those 5 elements would be the one who would decide if, when, and how the conflict in Syria will end. As for the threat of Al-Qaeda conducting attacks against Europe, the question of the far, as Dr. Azani was mentioning, the far enemy versus the near enemy, I would suggest to differ between those 2 types of attacks, embryonic types of attacks. The personal initiative attack versus the organized attacks. The personal initiative attack, it's the lone wolf attack, it's the homegrown terrorist attack. This is the type of probably what we saw in Belgium, recently in other cases in Europe altogether, in which one person, it could be sometimes few peer group, few members, few family members or friends, as it was in Boston, are being radicalized after they've been exposed to what Dr. Azani was showing you, the cyber jihad, and they are being radicalized. And one day they decide that they want to commit a terrorist attack. So they download the cookbook, they manufacture the explosives, they do whatever it's needed. They just take a rifle or even a cold weapon, and they go and inflict this terrorist attack. The danger in those attacks is that the security services find a huge problem in tracing those attacks before they occur. Usually you don't have an intelligence warning to this type of personal initiative, lone wolf type of attack, because it starts and ends with one sick mind of the terrorists themselves. The good news is that those attacks are usually much more limited than the organized attacks, the 9/11 type of attack. And the second group, as I mentioned, is the organized attacks, in which an organization is involved in all the stages of the planning, preparation, and execution of the attack. The 9/11 attack is one example. We can show many other cases of organized attacks. Those attacks are usually much more lethal, much more sophisticated, much more dangerous, much more casualties as an outcome of those attacks. But the good news is that the security services has a fair chance to know about that and have an intelligence warning, because there are many people which are involved in the preparation, the planning, and the execution of the attack. Going back to your question, I would argue that as an outcome of the civil war in Syria, we already see the beginning of the wave, the new wave of homegrown terrorist attacks on European and Western soil. We are already seeing that, and this will will become a growing phenomenon in the coming weeks, coming months, and coming years. As for the organized attacks, which being organized by terrorist organizations, I do believe that those organizations are now preoccupied in the regional affairs, in being rooted in those areas, getting stronger, taking over local regimes. Only after they will establish their authority there, then they will go to the far enemy and convey attacks like 9/11 types of attacks on Western targets altogether. So this is something that down the road would happen. Right now, homegrown terrorism is the immediate threat.
But to elaborate on the not having warnings, maybe you don't have warnings on a specific attack, but in the case in Brussels, most probably once it's going to be clear, in the case in Boston bombing, in the case in London, in Madrid, all those bombings or some of those suspects who carried that out were under the radar screen of some of the agencies. The problem was that the information was not shared and that no action was taken. And it was under the radar screen of the agencies, usually not only one state, but more states than one. So the issue is that even if in those lone wolf attacks, there is usually some information and something pointing out. But Eitan wanted to disagree.
Regarding the story of near enemy and far enemy, there is an ongoing debate inside Al-Qaeda from the early days of the organization itself. So what they did, they decided upon a priority. We need to prioritize our field of operations. And we didn't prioritize this field of operation. They decided what will be the major area of operation and what will be the secondary area of operation. So because this debate was carried out inside Al-Qaeda during the last year, because the story of Syria, because the Zawahiri lost his capability to deliver orders to the commander of Al-Qaeda in Iraq. And he published in September 2013 his strategic declaration regarding who is the enemy. And in his view, very clearly said it. Our enemy, and we need to focus our operations against the far enemy. It's United States. We don't have a lot of capabilities, so what we need to do is focus our efforts on United States. Leave aside internal debate. Leave aside other issues of corrupted regime in the Middle East. Meanwhile, he carried out other operations. He nominated the Al-Qaeda leader in Yemen to be his deputy. Meaning I'm not just operating from Afghanistan, now I had my deputy operating in the Middle East, so I can operate within the Middle East with Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula as a part of the concept of Al-Qaeda operation on the ground. So it's not clear-cut a policy and strategy to say, okay, now we are operating against the near enemy and then we will operate against the far enemy. The strategy or the policy is the far enemy first. The reality on the ground, because the ability of every field of commander to get his own decision, the reality on the ground that there are operations in the near enemy area by the local field commander of Al-Qaeda. So it's not a clear-cut situation in Al-Qaeda, as you can understand.
So, ladies and gentlemen, I guess there are no urgent questions anymore because the time is running out and we have spent here more than 2 hours already discussing. We have promised you here in CEVRO that we will get more internationalized. So this is one of the events working with other institutes and other esteemed organizations and institutions from other countries. So recently we have signed an agreement with the University of Buckingham on cooperation. You could see also on the screen advertisement of future seminars, conferences, activities on behalf of the Transatlantic Centre. I can invite you to the debate about Russia, about Putin's Russia and the borders of the present day being constructed Russian Empire, if you wish, and what it means and where it lies. So I hope that for the other activities and other events you will be coming in such good numbers as today. We can promise you more entertainment in the future. And we can really promise on the subject that we will not be overwhelming you on the subject of terrorism, but in the broader sense of the security studies and of the security issues, we really want to focus on the various aspects of security. So one of the topics will be the cybersecurity in a broader sense than just the terrorism. It will be the other aspects of security. You will see here more events, more lectures, and more studying programs being developed. And of course, the best here, not only in Prague, but in the whole Czech Republic. So thank you very much for coming. I want one more time do thank all those who have directly contributed to this event to be happening. Because, of course, I thank Ivo Schwarz to be coming and to be speaking here. And definitely, last but not least, I do thank to all three friends from Herzliya, from Israel, who came to Prague for a few days to conduct this public seminar, but also to have some other meetings. And if you would read some media, maybe you will read some interviews with them in the coming future. So thank you very much. I do thank all the organizers here at CEVRO Institute, and I'm looking forward to seeing you next time at the next event. Thanks.